Hello, Jordan Peterson. My name is Nehemiah. I'm a 26-year-old living in Ecuador right now. I'm down here as part of a U.S. program called Peace Corps, and I just started, so I'm going to be here for another 2 years. I'm making this video because I wanted to practice explaining my philosophy that I've been developing over the last 4 years, and you're one of the many people that I would love to talk to about my philosophy, both for the purpose of maturing my philosophy and also for the purpose of entering the global and internet conversation of philosophy and ethics and morals and civilization. So if you have the time or the patience to hear me out, I'm still kind of early on in my journey. Sometimes I think I'm not always the most articulate. I think I have an extraordinary talent for insight and making connections between very far apart things. But I think that that strength comes with a weakness of having an extremely difficult time ever being concise and being able to just focus on one set of connections. Because anytime I explain anything, I want to connect it to everything in the whole world. So I'm still in the process of developing skills for being able to be more concise, for being able to articulate things in a way that makes sense to other people sometimes. But this is part of that practice. So maybe you'll never see this version, but maybe I'll make like 10 more of these and I'll continue practicing and refining and getting better at describing stuff. But however it goes, this is my philosophy. Maybe the last thing I'd like to say before kind of diving in a little bit to my philosophy is that you've definitely had a pretty big impact on me over the last 4 years. Coming out of college, I was a bit more on the far left side. I grew up on the far right side. I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. I went to a Christian university that was strangely very liberal, especially in the humanities. I majored in psychology, and by the time finishing, I was pretty far left. But also around the time I finished, I ended up changing my mind about my faith and kind of arrived at a place of thinking that all religions were created by people on some fundamental level. But it was around that same time that I started watching a lot of your stuff online and your discussions with other people. And something I've always really appreciated about you is a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. That's something a lot of people tend to shy away from, and I appreciate people who can do that because that's a major sign of wisdom and at the very least a major sign of intellectual honesty, because the world is a very messy place, and people who aren't willing to face uncomfortable truths are never going to be able to develop a holistic and accurate picture of how the world actually works. But I also really appreciate your critical thinking, your interesting analysis of things. I super appreciate your passion. And I don't agree with you on everything, but that's fine. And you're a lot older than I am. There's a lot more that you know and a lot more experience that you have, which probably influences your thinking in ways that doesn't influence mine. But that's fine. I also think it's super cool that you're a psychologist because I want to be a psychologist. I don't have my master's yet, but once I get back from Ecuador, my first plan is to go get my master's. Anyway, without further ado, that's a bit about me. I'm super grateful for the influence that you've had in the development of my critical thinking. And I'm excited to share with you a little bit about what I've come up with and thought throughout my short little life of 26 years so far. And hopefully, I hope one day that I can be in a conversation with you, whether it's just a podcast episode or whether it's like working together on creating a new world religion, which I'll get to as one of my ideas. But however it goes, here we go. So Nehemiah Hines' philosophy of everything. I always jokingly call it the philosophy of everything. I got that from Stephen Hawking and his physics obsession with coming up with a theory of everything. But I'm more interested in philosophy. So the kind of fundamentals of my philosophy, hopefully there's nothing confusing in here or misleading, because I think that some of these ideas people have preconceived notions about, and that's where maybe with time I'll figure out ways to talk about these things in a way that are less triggering or misleading. But for me, these are important mostly just for the sake of accuracy and truth, which are things that are extremely important to me more than anything. So one fundamental thing for me is that there's only one thing exists, which is the universe. Whatever that means. If there's a multiverse, then all of the multiverses together, in my mind, collectively make a universe. If God exists, God is part of the universe. In my mind, any separation that we make between one thing and another thing are a separation that we're projecting onto the world, and it's not a separation that really exists. So that's just kind of like, it's a very abstract idea, but I think that's extremely important. Two, I don't think that there's any reason to believe the world is not predetermined by the laws of physics. A lot of people have a lot of really strong feelings about this. I made a video where I talked a little bit about my thoughts on that with regards to free will. But I think that for the sake of intellectual honesty, anybody who's willing to not be emotionally biased by what they want to be true, there is no actual reason in the physical world to believe that there's anything besides the laws of physics basically predetermining everything. It's not that it's not possible, it's just there is no reason to believe it. It's like the same thing where it's like aliens is maybe slightly different of a category, but like they probably exist. Like it seems extremely likely that they would exist, but we have no actual evidence yet, so believing in it doesn't entirely make sense. And there's nothing useful about believing in things that have no evidence, because even if they're true, the fact that they're true isn't useful, because if you don't have knowledge that you can use to accomplish things, it's useless. But that gets into another thing. Next major thing, actually right off of that, I think one of the reasons why people get so torn up about free will is because they think that we care whether we have free will. When people tell us that we don't have free will, it makes us feel like we don't have the ability to make choices to influence our lives. I think that this isn't true. And as much as it's actually a contradictory philosophy to believe that we can make choices that influence our lives and also believe that everything is predetermined by the laws of physics, I also think that one of the signs of maturity and intellectual sophistication is being able to hold ideas that appear to completely contradict each other as simultaneously true. And I think that these things are both true, and I think that it's possible to hold and understand both of them contextually apart from each other in a way that is functional, useful, pragmatic, and also just part of the nature of our attempt to understand reality, which does not allow everything to fit together neatly. I think number 4, that objectively speaking, the only thing that matters is our subjective desires. And this is basically that objectively speaking, nothing actually matters, but subjectively speaking, we care about things, and that's what makes something matter. The universe doesn't care, but like in this moment, in this time, there are things that matter to me, and so therefore it makes sense for me to act in a way to try to accomplish the things that matter to me. So that's going to basically, it seems like such a simple idea, and I think most people would kind of be like, I mean, how obvious could you get that like literally the definition of wanting something is that it's the thing that you want? And of course, we're always going to try to do things that get what we want, like it seems so obvious. And yet I think the point I'm going to arrive at the end of all of this is that I think the biggest, most fundamental thing people seem to be missing when they have conversations about what we should do in the world, whether we're talking about politics, economics, mental health, power, war, all of these different things, we're not having a conversation about what do we want. I don't think that we understand what we want as individuals or collectively. And I think that when you don't know what you want, you can run around all day and say all sorts of crazy things, and you're not going to get anywhere, because the analogy I'm going to finish with is basically that you could have all of the maps in the world which explain how to get from anywhere to anywhere, and if you don't know where you want to go, all of those maps are completely useless. And that's where I think we're kind of at in the modern world right now. I think we have a ridiculous amount of maps, and we have no idea how to use them or and also we have no idea where we want to go. So yeah, those are kind of the fundamentals of my philosophy. I'm going to extrapolate that a little bit throughout the rest of this. So to start with, this is my current understanding of what I think people want. Generally speaking, if you think of humans as a collective organism instead of as individuals, which I think in certain kinds of conversations makes way more sense. Some research that's been done that I am a fan of is by Martin Seligman in his book Flourish, where he talks about research where they basically concluded these 5 major categories of things that humans do for their own sake. Obviously, there are a million things that we say that we want or that we act in accordance with want, like working a job to get money, and money is not on this list. But the reason we get money indirectly is probably because we think that it's going to get us one of these 5 things. Plus, working a job might be a lot more than money anyway. It might be for engagement, it might be for meaning, it might be for accomplishment. But generally speaking, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this right now, but I think that these 5 points are not the most sophisticated, but a starting point for beginning to think about the conversation of human well-being and flourishing in the context of like human beings actually getting the things that they want. And I think that you'll see what's missing on here. The closest you could probably get is positive emotion. But I think Western culture is obsessed with the idea that humans want hedonistic things. And I think that is a major misunderstanding that most people have about themselves when it comes to what actually results in a happy, fulfilling life. But that's a complex thing, and people don't get that. And especially as religion is kind of getting super challenged and torn to pieces, certain kinds of wisdom and complex understandings with regards to what humans want are getting torn apart too. Although I am not necessarily a fan of ancient religions because I grew up in Christianity, and there are some things in it that I absolutely love and that I'm super grateful for, and I'm super glad I was raised religious. But man, there's so many things in it that make me want to pull my hair out. And there are definitely some things in there that make me very angry, and some experiences that I had growing up within religion that are almost like scars, I would say, that I'm going to carry with me the rest of my life. But that's not what this video is about. Moving on from the general stuff, we also have to understand that individually, everybody is a different person. And in the same way that we have a body made up of a lot of different parts and pieces, and sometimes there's cancer, this is a hard truth to accept, but there's a level at which we cannot operate functionally as a collective group if we can't draw lines of what's acceptable and not acceptable and have the heart and the willingness to fight with power and force against things that threaten the organism. So a really simple example are things like Ted Bundy, where I don't believe in free will, so I don't blame him for anything that he did. But he would represent, in my mind, a kind of cancer in the human organism, and there is no way the human organism can flourish for the benefit of the collective with somebody like him running around raping and murdering people. So it makes me sad, and I have compassion for him, that I feel like what made sense is what happened, which is something like the death penalty, or at the very least life imprisonment. I'm not here to have that conversation, and I don't have set opinions on it, but it's a thing that we have to understand, that there's no utopia where you arrive where all humans get all of the things that they want. Most humans can work together collectively to compromise and to mostly get most of the things that they want, but there are always going to be people that get farther and farther out into the fringes, and there's a point at which you can't compromise, and things get kind of uncomfortable. But we have to be able to face that truth and do something with it, or, cancer will kill us. But yeah, it's just, there's a spectrum for everything. Nothing is black and white, so that's one of the spectrums that we have to understand when we're talking about what do humans want, because we're both collective and individuals. So I think that one of the things that we often misunderstand about what we want, in the Western world especially, and I think this is the result of Western religion, but I think that we're obsessed with this idea that people are either selfish or selfless, that you're either somebody who serves the collective or you're somebody who serves your own self-interest, as opposed to being able to understand a more nuanced, balanced perspective that not only do people have the capacity to do some of both, but that they're not mutually exclusive things, and that the overlap there is way stronger and way more of what's going on with human desire than the non-overlapping part. People really want relationships with each other. People want meaning in their life. People want accomplishment. And all of those things have elements of overlapping with regards to individual and collective human desires. And as long as we demonize people for having individual desires, people are going to rebel against serving the collective. And it's always going to be this battle, because it will never work to worship the individual, which is something that Western culture is kind of leaning into right now. And everybody's depressed and anxious and hates their lives. But also you can't emphasize the collective too much and demonize people for having their own individual desires. And finding that balance is complicated, and everything's complicated, which is why things are always erring on one side or the other, because it's really difficult to maintain the middle. But I think that Western religion is way too obsessed with the idea that people are these individualistic, selfish creatures, because they're not. People are happiest when they feel a sense of control, and people feel a sense of control when they're getting the things that they want. And what they want is to be connected and flourishing with other human beings. It's not to be in a room by themselves with the door shut, getting things that they want. That's such a toxic and black and white way of thinking about humans that I think is super way off from the reality. Another thing that I think is a massive lie in Western culture is the idea that we're missing something. When you look at those 5 things that Martin Seligman got to, I think that without those things, a human will wither and die. But there's also another side to reality that a lot of psychotherapy actually focuses on, which is a kind of internal self-empowerment. It's very much along the lines of what Viktor Frankl said in his Man's Search for Meaning book, where it's not about what happens to us, it's about the way that we respond to it. We have that choice between the thing that happens and the actions that we take in response. And it makes me laugh that he came to that conclusion, but on some level that kind of thinking is almost like the fundamental philosophy of something like Buddhism, which is the idea that if we let go of striving and trying to force the world around us to be something other than what it is, including ourselves, when we stop doing that, that's when we stop suffering, because pain and suffering is not actually suffering. Resisting pain and suffering is suffering. And I want to study more of that, and I'm intrigued by that. And yeah, personally, I feel like there's so much overlap between what has been developed in the field of psychology and that Buddhist kind of thinking. And I think there's a lot of value in understanding that the point of life is not to fix everything. The point of life is to look around and smile and be excited about just what happens to currently exist in this moment. So, yeah, I think Western religion, one of the big beefs I have with the religion I was brought up in is there's this chronic sense that something is missing. And even things like prayer always have this undertone of grasping at trying to control life. Something is innocent as oh, we're going on a trip and I'm going to pray that we have a safe trip, is implying that we're not okay with if something goes wrong on that trip, and then when it does, we get torn up about it, as opposed to being able to be hey, you know what? If we crash and all die on this trip, that's okay, because those kinds of things happen in life, and I don't need to hold on and control the situation so that that thing doesn't happen. But yeah, so those are a few thoughts I have about Western religion. Some thoughts I have on Western secular culture, kind of on the other end of the spectrum. I think a huge lie is the idea that suffering or pain is bad and evil. I've heard a lot of people talk about humanistic things with regards to human suffering as being bad. And I have a really uneasy relationship with that idea because, again, kind of back on that Buddhist thinking, I think that if you're going to be realistic and honest about the fact that we live in a world that is messy, there will never be a world without suffering. And on some level, trying to remove suffering actually throws off the balance of the natural course of life. And then I think it creates a different kind of suffering. I think we often focus on physical suffering as one of the first things. But ironically, I feel like physical suffering is actually the least significant kind of suffering. Because our brains automatically assume that when we are suffering physically, we need it to stop. But actually, like, the way to have the least amount of psychological suffering is to acclimate to physical suffering so that when it happens, it doesn't bother you, which is a lot of what, like, they do in military training and stuff. And that's a much more functional and resilient way to live in the world. So I think that, again, as with everything, you have to find a balance, but I think that secular thinking discounts the need for resilience and strength building with regards to physical, emotional resilience and being able to understand we're always going to live in a messy world, and actually there's something really beautiful about being resilient and being able to go through painful experiences. We literally do it on purpose half the time, and that can play into things like accomplishment. Ironically, on the list of 5 things that Martin Seligman researched, none of those things required not pain. In fact, a lot of those things require pain. Like, it's impossible to feel a sense of accomplishment without pain. So if we want accomplishment, we have to accept pain as a part of life. If we want to be in relationships, we must accept pain as a part of life. There's no way to have relationships without getting hurt. There's no way to have relationships without getting offended sometimes. There's no way to build relationships without feeling anxious or insecure about whether other people like you. So, yeah, I definitely think it's extremely toxic to think that suffering is bad. And I think that's a massive part of a misdirection in the thinking and navigation of secular culture currently. Another thing that really bothers me in secular culture, again, this is an overemphasis on the individual, but in an obsession with giving, like, individuals their rights and validating feelings, the whole idea of truth and authority has just kind of been thrown out the window. And it's an ironic thing for me to talk about because growing up in an extremely authoritative culture, I have extreme reactance to authority. But I feel like I also have always had and still maintain a kind of temperance toward authority, where I don't reject authority, I just reject illegitimate authority. So if somebody knows what they're talking about, I'm willing to put myself under the authority of listening to them and humbling myself in that moment to be like, they know something that I don't, and I'm here to learn. If I'm in a group and we're working together toward a goal that I believe is a good thing, then I'm going to put myself under the authority of that person to work in that group to accomplish that thing. But the second somebody's like, you better do what I say or else, I'm just going to be like, hey, fuck you, and I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want. I definitely have some things still work through there, but I do think that this idea in secular culture right now that everyone can just do whatever they want, and you can have a live and let live society, that is not a functional way for humans to actually get the things that they want. Because as COVID demonstrated, if you can't get everybody on the same page about what's happening and how we can collectively respond, you can't effectively navigate complex things like a pandemic. Because when you have massive groups of people that resist something like a vaccine or resist believing that it's even a reality that it's happening, you're threatening, again, kind of like cancer threatens the body, you're threatening the entire collective humanity, because you're not having a collective enough attitude to kind of like pull everybody into a kind of agreement to work together in uncertainty toward likely possible positive outcomes. Anyway. And really the hope and goal of all of my philosophical thinking and all of this is really to try to get to the root of the problem. So here I kind of have a picture of a bunch of things that I think in red are things that our culture and our politics focus the most on in terms of like trying to fix these things by addressing these things directly. But then you have all of these like underlying things, which are the reason those things are happening. And so as long as we continue to try to attack the red things and not attack the blue things, the red things are just going to keep coming up because we're not attacking the roots, we're just attacking the symptoms, which is extremely characteristic, I think, of Western society. And yeah, you can just kind of look at that, pause the video if you want to, but I think it's somewhat self-explanatory. So yeah, I feel like when it comes to a lot of online discussions and a lot of like influencer culture, like when I first got out of college, I was following some health people, and I think I got a lot of really cool health tips, and I learned a lot about nutrition and exercise and how the body works and health. But the biggest thing I ran into is that how do you try to live a healthy lifestyle in a culture that is so deeply toxic? And I'm just talking about health. I'm not even talking about anything else. Because as human beings, we have such limited time and energy. So if I'm trying to meet all of my needs and not just my health needs, I constantly had to consider, like, how are the choices I'm making for my health influencing my social life? Because when you try to be a healthy person and you have a bunch of friends who aren't being healthy, your opportunities to spend time with them in a kind of like effortless way gets complicated. And when you're trying to go grocery shopping in a store that's trying to market to you a million things that are super bad and toxic for you, it's extremely psychologically difficult to walk by those cookies every single day and be like, no, I'm not going to get them. So again, I just feel like, on one hand, I super appreciate, and obviously I'm a part of this conversation where people online are talking about what they think are the solutions to the things in the world. But I think so much of the time you're talking about the symptoms and not the solutions. So a symptom would be like telling someone to pick the right ingredients at Walmart. Attacking the root of the problem would be, how do we get rid of marketing toxic things for our health and move toward a culture where we actually value building stores that encourage healthy living, so that when people walk into the store, all that's there for them to buy are healthy things instead of having to search really hard for the healthy things. And that comes down to the people and the values and what we think matters, because we're the ones who ultimately trickle into the government that decide what are the structures that we create in the world. So if we have a bunch of like really non-self-aware, reactive people that are leaving religion and hate authority, and are hyper-obsessed with individual freedom, the capitalist market just loves that because it can manipulate them, all these emotionally unaware people all day with marketing, and people somehow think that they have freedom when we live in this super toxic, enslaved society where we're all addicted. Well, I don't like to say addicted, but like sugar's being weaponized against us to be extremely unhealthy and all these different things. However it goes, one of the analogies I came up with is that targeting individuals and trying to like tell people that like you should do this, you should do that, like to be a happy person you need to do this, to be a healthy person you need to do that, is like telling a bunch of really poorly manufactured, or telling people who have a bunch of really poorly manufactured cars which mechanic to go to, or trying to tell people among the really poor manufactured cars which ones to pick and buy, whether you're talking about the make or the model. And I think what we need to be doing is we need to be thinking about how are we manufacturing the cars, and that comes into things like education and our authority in governmental structures and stuff. And I don't think that we can build good education systems or good governmental structures when everybody's on a million different pages. And that's where I'm going to have some solutions or thoughts that I have, at least. But yeah, I don't think it's a problem with individual choices. I think if you target individual choices, you'll get nowhere. Because the problem ultimately is a social engineering problem. It has to do with how people are being raised, what they believe, what they're being raised, what values are they receiving, both in their families and then also in college, which I know you, Jordan Peterson, have pretty strong feelings about, and I'm kind of with you on some of that. This kind of comes back a little bit more to the secular world again, but I think one of the biggest problems we have is not a knowledge problem, it's a self-awareness problem. I think especially as we continue to throw out authority as religion kind of crumbles in the modern world, we're kind of arrogant with science, thinking that since we have all of this information that somehow we have what we need to solve all the problems. But the biggest problem with humans is that we're emotional, and we always use information to get the things that we emotionally want. And we all kind of have like a baby inside of us that is kind of running the show. And if we don't cultivate an awareness of that baby and what that baby wants, we will live our whole lives blind, thinking that we're making such smart decisions because we're so smart and we have all this information. But really we have no idea what we're doing and we're not getting anywhere. But we're defensive and we're insecure and we're arrogant and we have all of these emotional things, and all of us are completely blind to so much of that, and we refuse to accept that, and we don't understand that. And I think that things like mindfulness meditation and mentorship by older, wiser people are things that are required to build humility and self-awareness. And if we don't find a way to like mass develop self-awareness in people, like no problem you try to solve socially is ever going to work, because as long as everyone is like an untrained animal running around following their every last little emotional whim, you're never going to be able to organize society in a way where people collectively agree to make intelligent policy decisions for the collective benefit, because everybody thinks that they know the solution to the problem, which is ridiculous and stupid, and almost everybody has no idea what they're talking about. So a cultivation of self-awareness would allow a group of people to identify who to trust and who to listen to and who has strengths and what, and to work together to use those strengths to create a collective positive outcome. But yes, self-awareness, I think, is one of the biggest problems of everything in the world. So these are some of my ideas that I'm going to spend the rest of my life targeting. These ideas are absolutely not set in stone. I have outlined here kind of what I think the problems are in the world, and my hope is to find a way to wrestle with and do something positive with regards to those problems. So whatever that ends up looking like is what it'll end up looking like. I will try stuff. These are 4 ideas that I'm going to work toward currently, and at whatever point they fail or whatever point they need adjustment, they will fail or be adjusted. I don't care if these ideas work. I just want to have a positive impact. So, everything will always be evolving. But one of my first ideas, and a lot of these overlap actually, but I think it would be incredibly awesome I want to pioneer a society of wise people. And it will have requirements like it'll have a hierarchy, and you kind of like level up the hierarchy, but in order to do so, you have to be able to demonstrate that you understand certain complex philosophical things. You have to be able to demonstrate that you don't just cognitively understand, but that you've actually been through experiences in life that help you to understand certain things. And there'd be requirements of like time spent learning from somebody who's higher in the hierarchy in terms of cultivating self-awareness and wisdom. So, no system can ever be perfect when it comes to authority, but I'm convinced that if there is a key to unlocking an authority system that is generally functional and resistant to things most authority fails at with regards to like arrogance and corruption and power and selfishness, having a requirement of a cultivation of wisdom and self-awareness would be one of the most essential ingredients. So I want to become a self-aware person continually. I want to continually become more wise, and I want to create a society of people who work around a criteria, and that hopefully you'd be able to have separate different groups around the world. So it's not just one completely centralized system, but that what they all share in common is the criteria for ranking up. And then they would be able to talk to each other and have a very powerful voice in the modern world as a group of people who are trustworthy, who, when they say things, they should be listened to because they actually are experts with regards to understanding what do humans want. So this is one of my ideas that I really like. Very much hand in hand with that, I had the idea of basically creating like a new modern world's religion, where you basically create a Venn diagram of every religion in history and then hyper focus on where they all overlap to kind of try to draw out all of the ancient wisdom that I think exists. I think there is so much wisdom in things like the Bible. I don't know much about the Quran. I've started getting a little bit into like Buddhism and a little into Hinduism as I've been reading about Gandhi. But I just think that there's so much wisdom in the world already, and I think I really enjoyed having something like the Bible to grow up with. But I think you could create something that's similar to the Bible, but that's a lot less ambiguous and something that is a lot less frustrating to read. So I would take so many things out of the Bible to use in this new book. There's so many things I would not include from the Bible, though, that are so annoying and stupid. But yeah, anyway, I think I jokingly, but also not jokingly, say religion with regards to this idea, because I think that some of the tenets of religion involve like a shared value system that is defined by belief in a set of values as opposed to nationality or things along those lines. I also think that something like religion kind of embodies like rituals and celebrations in culture, which is something that I want to cultivate, both in terms of like music and calendar and like annual reoccurring celebration and reflection on values and things that matter in life. And yeah, there's so many things in my religious experience growing up that I actually really did appreciate. So I want to, like, again, kind of like the Bible, extract a lot of the really positive things and still do something with it, but leave behind a lot of the really toxic things. These next two things are a bit more on the very practical side. I think it would be incredible if there was something, I call it Character Academy, but it would basically be an opportunity for kids coming out of high school to just have like a dedicated year of almost this like military type training. But instead of it being focused on warfare, it would just be focused on the cultivation of character through doing physically hard things, through like rigorous teamwork activities, but also with a heavy emphasis on teaching critical thinking, teaching self-awareness, having meditation as part of it, having counseling as part of it, having both like individual and group counseling for people to talk through and work through their childhood traumas. And you would, like, if you could fund something like this, that would like transform whichever generation first came through it, because you'd have all these people coming out of their growing up, and it wouldn't matter what kind of families they grew up in. When people are like, 15 to 20 years old, I feel like they're so malleable. And if you could teach them character, critical thinking, and self-awareness, like they would have the whole rest of their life to build on those things that you gave them just in that like 1 or 2 years. And it would also help a lot of people make better decisions about like, what do they want to go do? Do they want to go to college? Do they want to go to trade school? Because they would be able to disconnect from their family without going hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, which is like the experience I had, where in order to kind of like divorce myself from some of the toxic things in my family, I had to go to college. And I didn't plan it that way, but it's what happened. But also I ended up in a ton of debt. And I think it would have been really cool if I could have not gone to college and gone into a ton of debt and still was able to kind of like grow up and grow outside of the family culture that I grew up in. So this is one of my ideas. And then my last idea here, this is super random, but when I was in 8th grade, I don't know what the program was called, but they had this like short thing for a few months where there was this like online computer program website thing, and it had all these like really cool animations and characters, and it had a number of different like mathematical and science related concepts that you had to like master by solving the problems. And it was so much fun to try to like master each of the categories. And I kind of have this vision for building an online website where you basically have all the like fundamentals of how life works, from a very humble human perspective of like, who am I in the world? What are the things that I want? How does the world work together economically and politically around those things? But in a way that's like really fun and people want to do it, so that like anywhere in the world people could like play on this, and without even having to pay money, you could be able to like be having a positive, massive impact, again, on imparting values of wisdom, self-awareness, critical thinking, and just like a general education and awareness of even like what the world is and how it works, for like sex education and careers and economics and politics. So this is me. These are some of my ideas. And again, I'm more concerned about like being a part of a bigger conversation that gets away from focusing on symptoms and instead really starts focusing on the root of a lot of these problems that we face in the modern world. I will say that my philosophy that nothing matters, one of the reasons that's important to me is because growing up within religion, I was so torn up by thinking that certain things actually mattered forever. So like if somebody died and they didn't know Jesus, they were going to like go to hell forever or something. And actually have like so much peace now in understanding and accepting that nothing actually matters. So if I spend my whole life trying really hard to solve all these problems and it doesn't work, it's like, that's okay. Because nothing actually matters. And it's not a reason not to try. It's just a reason to like feel peace and to not get all torn up and anxious and frustrated about what I can't control. And I can't control anything except myself. I can't control whether the things that I do work. I can't control whether the things that I know are accurate. All I can do is try to be accurate according to the best of my knowledge and by cultivating self-awareness. But at the end of the day, I just want to live a happy existence, and being a part of solving big world problems is something that makes me super fucking excited. So I'm going to spend my life doing this because I have fun doing it. Nothing makes me happier than being a part of a collective human effort to make everybody's lives better. Which again, so much goes into my philosophy of understanding that, like, yes, there are things I want, like sex and eat good food and have fun. But like once you develop a higher level of understanding with regards to yourself, you start to understand that like when I lay down at night, I'm happy when I spent a lot of time with people and when I have meaningful relationships with people. And that matters more to me than having sex or eating good food. And I think shifting that understanding will be super healthy. However it goes, I have these 3 books on here. The Art of Happiness and Ishmael to date are the 2 most influential books I've read with regards to shifting my worldview massively. Not specifically because I like wholeheartedly agree with what's in the books, but they just opened my eyes to perspectives that we don't get taught in Western culture. And I think that being a wise person involves being able to see the world from vastly different perspectives and being able to understand how those perspectives influence the world, because they're not necessarily right or wrong. They're just facets of understanding the world. So, yeah, my goal is to do these things, to pull the world toward more self-awareness in order to attack the roots of the real problems. I hope that what I said made sense. Once more, Jordan Peterson, I hope that you get to see this someday, and even if you don't, that's okay. I'll probably make more videos in the future. I need to continue learning how to cultivate my skill of being able to explain things in a concise way or in a way that makes sense. But in the meantime, this is what I have so far. Thank you again, Jordan Peterson, for the impact that you've had on my development of wisdom and critical thinking, and I appreciate your conviction and your passion in the world, and I hope that one day I get to talk to you in part of this conversation. Have a great life, and yeah, I guess I'm done for now. These are my ideas. Thanks for listening.